I used to bring on Danny Haifong to talk about China because at least he knows something about it. I don't know anything about it. I do know that they're not setting the world on fire with bombs like the United States. I do know that they don't have 1,000 military bases scattered across the globe like the United States. I know that when they engage in a country, it's not to overthrow their government, put sanctions on their economy to crush their workers so that they can install a puppet and steal their natural resources. That's what the United States does. So when China engages in another country, I know it's to help them build ports and infrastructure and things like that. I do know that about China. But I don't know anything about the Cultural Revolution. And Tucker Carlson had this woman on. I should just do a segment on it. I don't know why I'm talking about it. But anyway, because you said something in the chat. Somebody said something about China. Mm-hmm. What'd they say?
Oh, I
can't remember.
Gone.
Anyway, so Tucker Carlson interviewed this woman who drew a parallel between what is happening in our country, not only with COVID, but with the hashtag Me Too movement and the all kinds of things, and what happened during the Cultural Revolution in China. And people were saying, "Oh, she's just a propagandist. She's trashing China." And I was told by someone who knows something about China that she was actually soft pedaling what happened during the Cultural Revolution.
Yes, it
was actually way worse than that woman said it was.
Yes.
And so you know something about it, Russ? You big smarty pants?
No, okay, so we used to get into this more on the show, and as I think
you used to get into this more on the show. I didn't fucking bring this on our channel. You did.
Do you see how afraid Keaton has been made by the van that was parked outside his house for 2 weeks every time I brought this up? Not me. Yeah. No, yes, that's true. So I would bring it up and I would get into it here and there. And as I sense you're describing, we have a lot of pro-China voices in the space. Frankly, not all of them are authentic. Whenever I brought things like that up, you would get people in the chat who were clearly working for somebody. By their syntax, which was just off enough that if you're a native English speaker, you could tell they were not from Britain, as they would claim. What do you mean I am from Britain? Ha ha. Okay. That is silly. I cannot believe you said that. So I would get that kind of shit. But I promised our viewers, I said, look, I'll research it more. Then October 7th happened, and my research was more needed elsewhere. This is what I would say overall at this point, and this is what I've usually said about it on our show. There is absolutely no doubt that for even a lot of the people who are, very pro-China, you wouldn't want to live there. Okay, not everything is being made up by the State Department. That's ridiculous. And to defend the Cultural Revolution, I want you to find me someone who lived through it, who's going to describe it that way. Often when I find people who are very naive about this, look, I'm from New York, man. I've spent my whole life talking to people from every part of the world. I've talked to people from China. None of them describe the Cultural Revolution as a good time. But it is very hard when you get into things like the Uyghurs. It is very difficult to find neutral information. You either find stuff that's extremely oriented towards China propaganda or State Department propaganda. It's not that there's not that out there. It's not that they're wrong about that. In fact, I've had a lot of the people who are pro-China said, look more into Tiananmen Square. So I did. And yes, what we heard was exaggerated, but it wasn't non-existent. It's not that they had a tea party there. I mean, it did happen. The numbers were inflated by Western press. That's true. So what's difficult about China is actually finding objective information from somebody who doesn't have an agenda. So it is very difficult. But as you say, and this is my final conclusion, what goes on within that country is not really our business. That is not really my concern. Do I think that China ultimately, in terms of its international geopolitics, is less warlike? less interested in colonizing, less interested in conquering? In other words, do I think a world where China occupied the position that we do would be a more peaceful world? Yes, I do. And that's the only level on which it really concerns us out here in the West, an entirely different part of the world, where it's really not our business how China governs itself.
Well,
Let me just say very quickly, since I've been drafted into this argument now by my friend and co-host, I think the standard of would we want to live there is a bit of a shallow standard, because if we were surrounded by hundreds of hostile military bases, you wouldn't want to live here either. Trust me.
Sure,
The repression
You're giving a
that
reason
exists in
for the way
China
they
would
are.
be 10 times worse here if we were surrounded by hundreds of hostile military bases.
Yes, that's an explanation for why. And I'm not, again, I don't want to judge China or its people or its government. Yes, you're absolutely right. Like, I don't have a hard line on this. Like, oh, those Chinese people, that's not what I'm saying. I just, when I see people who go so far in the other direction, like, no, everything you hear about suppression and freedom of speech, no, that's all a lie.
No, but I think any evaluation
that's a
and
ridiculous
comparison
thing to
has
say.
to be in context, right? You have to put context to every comparison, right?
Well,
like
well,
you can't evaluate
I mean, it's
something
a
side by
separate
side
question.
as if it exists in a vacuum, basically.
It's a separate question. Like, you're okay, so we establish, yes, you really do have those elements in China, which is what I'm countering. Because as you know,
I mean, the elements of
you have
oppression.
people who will say, no, none of those problems exist in China. It's all State Department propaganda. And now you want to say, why is it like that? And it's understandable. Sure, it's another conversation.
I mean, so you're saying that there's greater oppression and censorship inside China, the one-party state, explicitly, than there is in the United States, a pretend two-party state? So that's the case you're making, right, Russ?
I am making that case for the same reason I'm making that case somewhat about, and to a lesser extreme, about England. There is a legal framework by which to challenge it. And hey, I was just there covering the Julian Assange here. So you don't have to tell me that there's a lot of hypocrisy around that in the United States, but it is not the same as, say, a comedian getting in trouble for making a joke about how his dogs evoked a China military ad. Now, you're going to say that we covered that. Now, you're going to say that didn't happen? I mean, I haven't seen anyone say that didn't happen. So, yes, that is something I cannot imagine happening here. Like,
maybe
these
Canada.
Two things can. What's that?
Maybe Canada.
Maybe.
No,
all I'm saying is if we existed under the conditions that China exists now, it would happen here. And if past is prologue, it would be a lot worse. Yeah.
Sure. And if you had a hostile foreign military power moving into Mexico, as Russia experienced with Ukraine, we would have been in there long before Russia went in. Sure. It's the conditions that create the circumstances. But sometimes you get people who deny the circumstances. And that's really what I have taken exception to. Because I don't think it benefits us to make things up. I don't think it benefits us to deny reality. I think it gives a lot of fuel to the conservatives who really do want to attack China, because then you say something like that. Oh, well, these people are in total denial. They don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't know that was going to happen, but that was all instigated or prompted by a Rumble rant. Isn't that something? Look at that. The power of a Rumble rant, ladies and gentlemen. I overheard it. I brought it up, and Russ took the ball and ran with it, and he's got a lot to say about China. And I didn't, again, it's like, I don't really know anything about China until the United States wanted to start invading it and bombing it. And just like I didn't really know much about Israel and Palestine until Israel started committing genocide in Gaza. And now I know everything about it, or a lot. I know a lot more than I did before.
It's hard to research this, but hey, man, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I've said I'm not leaving or I mean, unless it's for journalism, I'm not leaving the country again this year. But my next big trip is going to be to China next year. That's my plan if World War III doesn't break out before then.
Aren't you afraid that they'll send you away like a Uyghur?
Honestly, I was more afraid of that in England.
Yeah, I'm with you on there because, for instance, when I said that about Canada, it's real. They find
No, I know.
They find a comedian for just dealing with a heckler in Canada, right?
No, I know. Yeah,
because
I have an article I got sidetracked from about how Canada is evolving into the liberal dystopia of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So yeah, absolutely, no question about it.
And it's when people when they don't have a personal experience of the divine or of the transcendent or of God, when they don't have that personal experience, it then gets replaced by other things. And for instance, I would make the case it got replaced by science and establishment politics for people who on what they consider to be the left. I hate to say the left because people who are Democrats, people who support Joe Biden, are almost by no measure a left. They're only by almost no measure are they left.
Yeah.
They're pro-war maniacs.
Right.
They're pro forcing medical treatments on people. They're pro-censorship, which is the hallmark of every dictatorship. So I hate to call them left. And then normally you associate warmongering with right, but most of the people I know on the right are against war. So yeah. I hate these terms. They're very unhelpful and not useful anymore. Yeah. They're really not.
They don't really apply anymore. It's like a taffy factory exploded and everything went everywhere. You have these elements that have traditionally been considered left or over here and have been traditionally considered right or over there. It really doesn't mean anything. At this point, it's the people versus a global elite that wants to impose its vision of society on everybody else. That's the fight.
That's the fight. It's not left-right anymore. It's top-down. It's us against them. And, okay, wow, that was great. That was a great little conversation. Hey, come see us live on tour in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Berlin, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, right outside Pittsburgh, El Paso, and San Antonio, Texas. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.